Bulavinaka, Namaste and good evening. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Tonight we bring you another issue of concern, and as you know, Fiji Village Straight Talk, we have been out of the studio. Last week we were talking about drugs and the reality of the situation on the ground. We went to a safe house, spoke to a number of individuals there concerning issues emerging again, and of course authorities needing to act, urgent action required. Earlier this week we had the Chief of Operations of Fiji Police Force, ACP Levine Drew, coming out strongly, and this is just a few weeks after we had revealed and gotten a guest to share with us about the reality on the ground of children being used as drug peddlers, and more cases continuing to come up where the drug pushers, the drug suppliers, continue to use children to infiltrate even into the education system, the school system, and the principals and head teachers unable to control the situation and where we sit in relation to that. We will continue to look at that, and we are so grateful tonight that we've got Assistant Minister for Women, Children and Social Protection, Sashi Kiran, and the co-founder and program director of Inspire Pacific, Ben Morrison, to discuss issues that affect our young people in this country. And we thank you for talking to our viewers and listeners this evening. Now, going into the first question, Assistant Minister, what is the current situation regarding street kids in different parts of the country, as you have visited a few areas already?
First of all, Bula Vijay and Bula Vinaka to the viewers. Yes, things don't look too good. I've been in the West. You could, on an average, see when in early days I was going out, a couple of hundred kids lurking in corners. Some peddling drugs. We went around in private cars and asking for roll, and they offered us ice and meth, and then you're supposed to give a code word which we didn't know. So, but we went around experiencing some of this. Many of these kids have homes to go back to, so their profiling is a separate issue from the kids who live on the streets. And we've been doing the same in Suvarnasori corridor. Suvarnasori corridor we've profiled something like, so between 7 and 14 we have like 11 children, 15 and 35 we have 51, and 36 above to 59 is 35, and 60 above is 15. So these are sort of the age aggregated numbers. We are also seeing a large number of young girls on the street, which was a surprise to me personally. And the way we now operating is we are profiling the smaller ones. We put them in shelter in Lautoka in the Western Division, as well as in Suva. We're putting them in shelter, profiling, and then we're trying to see whether they go into rehabs or go into livelihood programs. And I'm grateful that Ben's team has taken some of our kids in their rehab as well.
And we'll talk further about the breakdown of numbers that the Assistant Minister has shared. Ben Morrison is appearing on Fiji Village Straight Talk. He's doing a lot of work on the ground with his group, a group called Inspire Pacific. Please explain to the people what you've been doing on the ground and the notable issues of concern for you.
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Vijay, for this opportunity to be on the show. It's an honor and a privilege. It's also an honor and privilege to be alongside Madam Assistant Minister here today. So Inspire Pacific is a vision that was birthed out of a desire to help our children and our young people. We're focused towards youth development, and we believe that investing in our young people is really investing in our future. Because of the obviously the influence they will have in our future. So that's sort of what Inspire Pacific is all about in a nutshell. Our primary aim or goal, you could say, is to awaken dreams. So I put up a picture when we share what we do Olympics team that won in the Olympic Games, and so I share how they are sort of at the pinnacle of achievement in the global standard of what a Fijian can do in terms of being at the top of especially in the sporting field in rugby, and so that inspires us, and we believe that there is that potential in every young Fijian to not just be able to do something, but awaken a passion and a gift that sets us apart from everyone else in the world. So yeah, that's what Inspire Pacific is about. For the last 4 years, we've chosen to target, we could say, the most marginalized of young people in terms of those who are more at risk and are prone to pro-criminal behavior and in conflict with the law in the juvenile center. We've also worked with some of the boys from the street. Much of our work has been centered around establishing programs within the center to help the ministry and the center, of course, in the rehabilitation of the boys who are there at the center.
Our Assistant Minister, recent statements have pointed towards the fact that majority of the street kids or youths are coming from broken families or villages and settlements. This is a question for both of you. Can you please shed some light on this, on what are we seeing on the streets?
In Suva and in the West as well, the team first of all says grief and loss. So that means many of the children who may be from broken families living with an aunt or a grandmother who dies, they come onto the streets. Some have talked about abuse by their relatives where they're living, but majority broken families. Few come from good families, and there's conflicts are there on the streets, but majority, that's what we are finding.
Yes, I would absolutely agree, and I think it's only common sense to know that a child needs a family to grow and to develop. So if there's a child that's acting up in some way, obviously you trace the root back to the family. And as Minister mentioned, when we did the profiling for the young boys we've been working with, it somewhat has we've gotten a feedback of about I think it's pretty much 100% the issue is in the family to some level, to some extent. And I would take it a step further, that there is a issue in the man of the home taking his role and his position as the father figure, because if you're looking at a family, much of responsibility, you would say, lies with the father. And not to say that the mother has no responsibility, but we are seeing this being highlighted, that a lot of these boys are part of the issue is their relationship with their father. So yes, it's a very interesting
The men have to
issue.
step up to the plate.
Absolutely, yes.
And become role models for their
Yes.
for their sons growing up.
Yes.
Instead of being absent.
Yes, and we're finding that these boys who are in the center are simply mimicking what they have been shown, and as all children do, a child just does what he sees, and so that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing a replication, sort of a passing on of a mindset that our Fijian men are passing on, and so with that, that's kind of why we have focused into working with boys. We know that there are also girls who come through the system, but we feel like there's a huge need to work with boys, and in that, work with young men in terms of how do they become healthy, supportive, productive citizens, not just now, but also in the future.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. And we are also asking your questions that you have sent to us, and questions have come in from around different parts of the country, also outside the country. I was just sharing with the guests tonight that we have questions as usual from outside the country as well, concerned about what's happening in our country. So on Fiji Village Straight Talk, send us the questions. You can email the questions on vijnarayan@fm96.com.fj, and we will field those questions. You highlighted, Assistant Minister, about you're surprised at the number of girls that are on the streets. What's the number of girls you're looking at, in what parts of the country, and What will be done about that?
In Suva alone, about 30% are girls. I'll tell you, one house, vacant house that the Honorable Minister for Youth and I went to meet kids. Out of the 20-25 young boys and girls, there were like almost half, 8 to 10 were girls. Some had partners in remand and they had babies. Many were just neglected or abused at home and on the streets. So what are we doing about overall? Like I said, we've profiled. We have a lot of good support from various churches have come on board. We have counseling and we actually check how they are doing. Some are clear-eyed enough, even though they say they've been using glue or marijuana and they're willing to move. Some we're looking into drug rehab and some into emotional and mental rehab because of the brokenness of where they are. Majority of the children that I spoke with on the ground and majority of the kids that Suva profilers teams have come up with say something like 44% want to complete their education and another 32% want to be employed. 5 start your own business, some get a driver's license, and about only few were very not clear where they're going. So we've listened to them, and we are working very closely with so many partners. One of the things that I'm grateful for is when we picked up the conversation, the number of people who've come on board. Ministry of Youth has come. They are tailoring the program for these kids to help them get them motivated. They have youth development centers where we're putting the kids. One of the street kids was immediately put into the music school. Nandave, Itoke Affairs has come on board and some of the girls have been placed there. APTC has come on board. There's quite a TVET, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries. So there are all these training centers. Once we assess the children of what they want to do, that's where they're going. I think one of the things that we're still working on, and some of the children we are finding are 7 to 8 years old. So we're looking at talking to Ministry of Education, how do we do bridging of numeracy, and literacy, go through a bridging in order to put them in some boarding schools, some of the rural boarding schools. The children who don't want to go home because every time they're taken home, they run back to streets. We are talking to the guardians to give consent that they actually be put in rehabilitation and boarding.
Now, a lot of work has to be done in relation to drugs. Drugs and glue has come up. More information emerges on children and youths either involved in the heavy usage or being targeted by the drug dealers. What is your assessment on the ground? What are you seeing on the ground? And I believe you're doing work with students as well.
Yes. I grew up in America. I did high school in America. And being in that environment, drugs are quite rampant. Spent a little time in San Francisco, so we saw the effects. We can see the effects of drugs on people. I say that to say that what I see here in Fiji, the need and the issues, it's a growing issue. And we're coming to a place we are almost looking like what's happening in America. I know we're still a far way off, but it's a growing need, it's a growing issue, and especially with the children. When it comes to dealing with the issue, I would say that the drugs is a symptom. That those who take drugs, it's a symptom of a deeper issue. And there's really, as much as we want to take away drugs and try to keep people from this having access to drugs, there really is a deeper issue at hand in terms of something that children are looking for, young people are looking for, in which they turn to drugs to try to satisfy whatever it is that emptiness is. And that's the thing that we've been trying to deal with. Much of our program is trying to focus on more of the internal issues that young people are struggling with in terms of security, value, worth, confidence, safety, being around the right people. Because once we deal with that, you can have drugs around you, but you'll have no reason to take drugs. I find that that's the strategy that seems to be dealing with the root problem. And I think as we move forward, much of our work is really trying to highlight what the root problem is that young people are facing, dealing with.
I was talking to some young people, and just regarding this issue of drugs, how it was maybe 20, 30 years ago, where it was all hidden, you couldn't access drugs, to now, the younger people are saying it's so difficult because it's just everywhere. And it's easily accessible and it's in your face. And then if people are going through some mental issues, that it's right there, and I mean within the system. How do you tackle that? How can you tackle that?
Well, they're multifold. One, you are already talking to the police. You know they're coming very hard on drugs from at that level. Ministry of Education is now making more counsellors and all available, and trying to identify it in schools. So I think many partners are working at a different level to try and remove accessibility as much as we can. But what you said in terms of if children feel safer, and there has to be a lot of awareness and real case studies where people have gone through it and they realize the impact. Like some of these children we meet, they've said we've been on the streets long enough. And I'll tell you a case of a particular boy I spoke with who didn't want to get into rehab. So we spoke with the children that day, Minister and we said, how many of you want to go to youth fair? And 10 of them put their hand up, 11 of them. Some said they didn't want to, right? So one of them, we talked to him, why? And he was quite aggressive, and he said, so eventually we got out of him that he sells marijuana at the market, he's a drug user, he gets easy money, and he doesn't want to. But after a little bit of conversation, because the partner of his, the female partner, had decided to go. So we talked to him about long-term family, and then he went, thought about it, and 15 minutes later he came and he said, I want to be part of it. And he's already been offered a job. So I think showing them another way. Most of them say they're tired of being on the streets, tired of the abuse, tired of some days getting food, some days not. So there will be a shift if there is enough information and there's enough support pathways. Children get easily affected by criticism, by judgment, and I think a lot of, most of us see them and immediately judge them, and they feel it. So how do you actually work through that? Now, if I may go back to, I've been talking to a lot of people in Suva, and some of the parents or some of the people have been saying, look, parents leave from Nosori to Suva to do a job at 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning. They don't really see the kids. And the majority of the damage, and we were told this in the West as well, is after 3:30 till they go home. That's the majority of the damage. They said drug is rife, children are floating around in town. And I was very proud to be told that Natamba School's kids are not loitering around because the teachers are there in the morning and in the evening. But what happens here in Suva is parents don't come back home till 7 or 8. So between the 3:35 and that 7, 8 p.m. until parents come home, that's where a majority of the damage is done. What do we do about it? And earlier I was talking to another youth organization. How do we create safety nets so that children can come and do homework, they feel loved, they can talk to somebody about something that happened to schools. You were talking about excessive bullying in schools, sexual abuse in schools. So children need that emotional, mental support and safety net. And they are neglected at the worst of their time. And a lot of young girls that you are hearing now with moving in with spouses, with partners, majority of them are looking for support and emotional support. And this is that young girl moving with adults into relationship is not only an indigenous problem that we are saying with street kids, it's all ethnic groups. We are receiving reports across, and largely these are very dysfunctional families. So I think if we are able to, and we have to think through out of the box, what does a community look like? Do we have housing? Are there places where parents can say, child, after school you go here, and there is support and I'll pick you after 7:30 or something, I don't know. But we'll have to think through how do we look after our children that the elements don't get to them.
You're watching Fiji Village Street Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Another question that was sent in, start off with you. This is a call and question for the reintroduction of corporal punishment at schools, allowing principals and teachers to take full control of children while in school uniform, as it seems these days it's a thing of the past. Several cases of children misbehaving, swearing at teachers, being truant, involved in drugs, etc. What are your thoughts, knowing that you have worked with children?
Thank you, Vijay. That's it's an interesting question. Like I said, I grew up in America. In America, treats discipline very differently. Obviously, we know, and much of the policies that we have kind of flow from that direction. I grew up around American children, and I understand the system. I understand what they're like, and so I have children of my own. So I'm trying to raise them, having those conversations with them, doing the corner thing, doing the room thing. But I sense and I feel that there needs to be discipline, definitely. But the question is, how do we discipline, and can discipline be done without, as we say, corporal punishment? Personally, I believe that it needs to be reintroduced. However, perhaps there needs to be some level of education around what is healthy discipline or means of corporal punishment. So I think really is corporal punishment is an issue of a matter of, can we use corporal punishment in a way that's not abusive? Because I think that was the issue in the past, of corporal punishment being abusive. However, the issue of discipline is a definite issue that needs to be dealt with. How are we disciplining our children in a way that they understand the consequences without actually falling off the cliff? Because we don't want them to fall off the cliff. However, we want them to understand that there are consequences to their choices. So I guess in that regard, I would be for corporal punishment, but a measure of corporal punishment that is controlled. And force is always the last option, but I think there is a way to use that. And I would say more so on the younger ages. As you arrive at a place of being able to converse with young people and understand and have an understanding, that there needs to be more dialogue that needs to take place so that children understand the consequences they have and that they're being supported to make right choices. I think we have, just culturally speaking, we have a very low sense of tolerance, we could say, for mistakes. And so punishment has always been you do something wrong, immediately the wooden spoon or the bell comes out. And so I think that's another aspect of discipline that needs to be dealt with, and maybe parents need to be taught how to understand that your children will fail sometimes, that they will make mistakes. And so punishment is it's not beating them up for the mistake that they make. Punishment is a means of them helping them understand consequences. And so, yeah, I think it can be done in the right way, but there needs to be a lot of
bigger discussion needed.
Yes, around
how much discipline is needed,
yes.
what is enough. And we remember when corporal punishment was in place, some teachers really, really went for it when they had the chance. Assistant Minister?
When you were saying that, I was remembering hosepipe on my hands, but
I remember those things too back in school.
I think we are a very violent society already. And part of the problem is because we are a violent society. Children get beaten up for very little things, and I don't think necessarily corporal punishment will do it. What's needed is much harder work. Corporal punishment is just too easy, you beat them, or you discipline them in a particular way. What we need as a society is patience and dialogue and values. And I must say thank you to, like, one child recently was vulgar from one school to another, and the whole community took responsibility and apologized and talked about the values. I think we need to be showing much more direction. And one thing we're lacking in this world is time. We're not lacking time, we are abusing time. We gladly are more on social media or in a social function rather than spending the time with the child. And I think there's much more. In our days, our parents were not, grandparents were not talking to us. They were showing us the eye and we would disappear. But the world has changed. We need to be having much more conversation. Children are asking much more questions. And how do you create that support? And I have a question for you guys. I mean, you think about it. When you go into the most difficult times, what do you think of? Who do you think of?
No, I don't have an answer to that.
Do you have, I mean, when you go through most difficult times, who do you think of?
Well, for me personally, I turn to my faith.
Faith.
Yeah.
Many of us think about our mothers or grandmothers, or, you know, like we look for shelter in our childhood, right? So when I think of the childhood and the lessons that we learn through storytelling is what gives strength in decision making. So when I think about legacy issues, you know, people say I left this building or I created this organization. I think the bigger legacy is what we carry in our learning. So my great-grandmother would have taught my grandmother. And they're little things which we don't realize. But the strength that's built inside us and the values that are built inside us and the faith that's built inside us is by people. So unless there is that level of love, and when I say that, you know, largely we've become very nuclear. We've left our extended. When we don't have patience, if there's a grandparent, there's a larger family circle, that provides a different level of support. And I see it in some of my family children. When the parents are busy, there's a grandparent who's supportive, you know. And what does a larger family look like? That's why I'm saying, what are the safety nets? It doesn't have to be your own nuclear family. If I'm able to see your child as, you know, somebody I need to look after as well as being part of the society, without looking at race and religion and this and that, then maybe we create a community of love, which is what we grew up with. I mean, not you, maybe in our context. You go to a communal function, you are taught by so many people. How do you carry a plate? You'll be taught by an uncle and an aunt will snake, you know, like along the line you learn so many skills. So I think beyond corporal punishment, we need to develop that patience and love as a community. Yeah. To rethink the society we want and the legacy we want to leave behind.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
I've always resorted to drugs because of the work that I do as a coping mechanism.
You said you started sex work and drugs at the same time?
I was 12 years old.
Do you believe, based on the current situation, your salary and allowances should be reviewed and reduced?
Definitely, I think it should be reviewed to reflect what is there in the market.
Is the government of the day promoting nepotism within our community and hatred towards Indo-Fijians?
Thank you very much. The answer is no.
$1 in $3 of our taxes goes towards servicing our debt. So you can't say it's nothing.
There's also the need to do financial inclusion a bit better.
What is your message to the people who may rate you as not good enough for finals rugby?
Success doesn't just happen overnight.
Fiji Village Straight Talk with Vijay Narayan. Watch it on the Fiji Village Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, Assistant Minister for Women, Children and Social Protection, Sashi Kiran, and the co-founder and Program Director of Inspire Pacific, Ben Morrison. Now, Ben, we have heard from Drug-Free World Fiji of the prevalence of high usage of meth amongst the young people. Many syringes found in school bags. People even as young as 11 years old. A story about a boy came from the maritime area, came for school here, and got into meth, and now he's selling meth, peddling drugs to get his next hit. He even has to sell himself at times, prostitution involved, and he's stuck in the system. He's being used to get other children involved in this hard drug, which is highly addictive and spreading across like wildfire in Fiji. What are you seeing on the ground?
Yes, we had one of our cases, one of the young boys. He was actually at 15 years old. He started doing meth, and his story to us was he was introduced to meth. He was injected by some older folks, and part of it was to sort of initiate him into this group, this gang, and to also get him to fight. So they would have a lot of fights amongst yasas, and so part of the ways they would, their victory strategy, you could say, is to take meth, and that keeps them going when the other person stops. So it is a very prevalent issue, and we're hearing stories of how young people are taking it in ways that we wouldn't have imagined. And these are some young people that we see sometimes, that are, on the street, and so the issue is very prevalent. I know that the police force is doing the best that they can, and I think it has been mentioned, but I believe there has to be a coordinated effort in order to deal with the meth issue, because there's the meth coming into the country, and there's the cooking it, of course, the accessibility. But then I always go back to how are we equipping our young people to be able to make the choice not to take it, because we live in a society now that access to these things is getting easier and easier, and so that's part of the work is stopping accessibility. But a bigger part of the work is how are we strengthening our young people's willpower and the environment to strengthen their willpower and provide options for them where they can make the right choice. And a lot of these choices for taking these substances, we are finding that with these young people, it's a coping mechanism. All of it is a coping mechanism, whether it's drugs, whether it's fighting, they're getting involved in things. It's a coping mechanism to deal with an issue that has spurred up from home. Because no one in their right mind, when they're happy, thinks, oh, I'm going to go and take some meth. It's, and sometimes we think of people who are on drugs as if, for some reason, by choice, they want to do it every day. But really, it's not the reality. The reality is it's a coping mechanism to some deeper problems, deeper issues, which could be mental health issues, it could be emotional trauma, it could be some internal issues that are happening, which have its roots in community, in households, that are part of a bigger problem, actually. And as the more we look, the more we're seeing there's actually a bigger problem. I think we talked about, this is quite prevalent in rural settings, in squatter settings. There's a reason for that. It's not, it's not by accident. There are some social factors, you could say, that are contributing to the high use of drugs and accessibility in these areas. So, yeah, I think that's where the conversation needs to be had, is what's the bigger picture? What's the root of all of these problems that we are facing with drugs?
This is leaking out into the urban areas, okay, and also it's well-off families or people who are at the middle income level not spared, because it's all across the board. That's the stats coming through is proving to be that it's very prevalent, and some of the young people getting into drugs or glue sniffing are blaming peer pressure, neglect and family problems. What are some of the solutions that are being looked at, Assistant Minister?
Before I talk about solutions, I think we also hear from a lot of, like you say, rich families as well, reaching out to us and saying we need drug rehab, affording people who've been giving the children money, and generally we see that neglect for a long time, and all of a sudden they realize the children are out of control, very violent. A lot of cases of violence towards parents, and then parents realize, oh, something's wrong here, and And we, as a government, while we're looking at mental health and drug rehab, it's still at its infancy stages. We don't have advanced drug rehab programs. We're working on them. One of the things that we're trying to do, and we're asking, so Ministry of Social Affairs and Ministry of Youth, you may know, went around the different communities, and they're still doing it. So what we're trying to do is comb the housing, the squatters, Toke communities, to profile how many young people are there. We're asking the churches to help us profile how many broken families are there. How do we provide social net for the broken families? But for the young or the unemployed, it doesn't have to be young. If they're unemployed, we are trying, so you've seen Ministry of Youth has organized a series of job fairs, because what we are told is there's an employment sector that's looking for people, and generally these kids who don't have confidence are not able to apply into it. So between Ministry of Youth and Ministry of Education's TVET program in Nandave and other training institutes, we are now basically going into communities, looking at unemployed dropouts, and then putting them through a motivation program and already enrolling them in Polytech and a whole range of programs to see if we can occupy them, they find a purpose, they find an income. And one of the things I think there still needs to be a little bit thinking around is the amount of money coming back, or remittances, and how they're used, because some places there is access to money and the kids, I mean, families don't want to work because there's but majority of the profiling being done in the communities, we're finding thousands of kids coming in. In each of the job fairs, we saw people coming in. And employers are taking them in and training them on the spot. One construction company took 35 people at Masino in one day for the collected the CVs and hired them same time. So there's a lot of matching that needs to happen. And that means a lot of work, interministerial work. And we're also requesting the churches and other bodies to see where are the problem ones. If we identify the problem children and can put them to rehab early, if we can identify the young, unemployed, how do we find them a motivation? So Ministry of Youth is using the Seeds of Success. They've even been using it for our street kids, motivate them, and then we place them into skills training. So hopefully this constant mopping exercise over the next few months. Police in Lotoka did profiling of about 150 kids, but more than 100 of them were absorbed in TVET immediately, and the rest are getting absorbed in Ministry of Youth programs. So I will say that different ministries are coming together, recognizing the problem and are working at it. It's early days, so we'll only be able to tell you in the next few months how it's going, but we need everybody's support.
A major issue regarding loitering youth. So you have children who live on the streets, then you have the loiterers, which is also becoming a major concern. And these are people who are who just come maybe for the day and stay around at night, and also looking at opportunistic crimes, etc. Have those people been profiled apart from those others, and what are they saying?
So our first priority is getting everybody off the street to live a dignified life. So the children, the beggars, we're working on them right now. But wherever they're loiterers, police and our teams are profiling them to try and understand where these youths are coming from. If these loiterers are coming from broken families, we're trying to understand and go back to those families to understand whether this is the way of life or is it like a one-off. Holidays we are looking at, and different town councils and other people have come on board as well, and they tell us, okay, these are the loiterers here. And then our people are profiling them to see what does their life look like. Many of those loiterers, and in some places, in some of the districts we've seen, they're very focused drug peddlers, where they come in, they're loitering in corners and lurking, but they actually have a business to do. And some are just coming out through peer pressure. So they are on our radar, but our first priority is the ones who are permanently on the streets to move them out. So I can tell you that probably better in the next couple of months.
Inspire Pacific been talking to these people on the streets?
Yes. The issue is not new. We're seeing these young people on the streets, even as young as 9, 10, 11 years old. And there's a growing number, especially in Suva, but Thank you to the Assistant Minister for the work that she's been doing, pushing that forward. But just going back to my conversations, this is probably where much of my thinking and focus is around, like, what is the bigger picture in this when it comes to not just the issue of loitering, but these children who don't have homes and who ended up staying on the streets, and they're staying under bridges, and they're staying in different parks around the street area. Why are they on the street, and where is the home? What's happening with their homes? When we talk about the solution to, we could say, homelessness, it's interesting that to a certain extent that we have somewhat of a solution within our own, at least within the Tauke culture. Because when you go into villages, there is no homelessness and there is no loitering in terms of people not having anything to do. In the village, everyone has something to do. If you are up and around, you're going to weed, you have to help with building the home, you have to... These things are happening outside of the villages. And not to say that it's not creeping in. It is creeping into the village settings. But the question of why is homelessness not an issue in the village, it's not a financial issue, because obviously, villages might not be as better financially than urban settings. The solution seems to lie in the social structure that is present. So when we look at social structures, there's very much a big difference, social structures in the village and the social structures in more of our urban settings. And we're finding that because of now the urban drift that's happening, families moving out of villages, moving away from their villages, they are coming now into the urban setting, and they're coming into a sort of a new social setting. They have to try to figure themselves out, and they obviously will go to the place that's easiest to set up. And so we see a huge increase in informal housing in the city.
And overcrowding in each of this.
Absolutely. And so these become contributing factors. So I guess if there's a certain issue within the social structure and this culture clash that's happening, coming out of the village setting, trying to move into the city, figuring out what's happening in the city, how do I figure myself out. And then the overcrowding, of course, pushes these children to a place where they're neglected. Parents don't have time for them because they're trying to figure themselves out. And then the children are left on the street. So there's a spiraling effect of issues that, again, we're trying to deal with them at different levels. But the question is, what's the root again? Yeah.
You've had some assessments done too on teenage sex, young people involved in sex and pornography when left or neglected by parents. You're getting some statistics through on that as well?
Yes, that's a huge rising case right now. Even just as recently as a few days ago, we got some very alarming cases amongst young boys. And because of the access, I guess, to pornography and the lack of boundaries and neglect from parents, access to the phones that we have right now, most children, I would not be surprised if we looked at the stats that more than 60-70% of our children have looked at some type of pornography here in Fiji. It's alarming, and it's an ongoing issue. And the thing about pornography is you start at one level and then it doesn't satisfy you, and you go to other forms of pornography that can be more violent. And so we're seeing this now portrayed and acted out we're seeing cases even right now in primary school where there are allegations of rape that are taking place in the primary schools, things that we would never have thought of could be happening in primary school. So it is very a big issue, the issue of pornography, and question of how do we stop that. Is it about banning sites? I think that's
probably have to.
That's going to be the conversations we had. But then on the other end as well, the big issue that we keep coming back to is family And are parents doing their job?
Parental responsibility.
Parental responsibility. We keep coming back to that issue of parental responsibility, and I truly believe that much of the solution, if we to deal with issues, is really to empower parents or to raise up parents to be able to understand the value and the importance of their role. And I think we've underestimated the effects of poor parenting on society. And because of that, there seems to be a trend, and there's a cycle that happens, especially when it's unplanned. You have pregnancy that's unplanned. You have young people who have children, they're not ready for it, they're not prepared, they have a child shifted around from grandparents and aunties and uncles, and so no one's really taken on that responsibility.
And abused along the way.
But it falls back on the parents. So the question is, how are we helping parents? And our work, much of our focus, we realize that a portion of it is on the boys, but a bigger portion is on parenting. How are we helping parents to understand the value of their work and how to help their children be better equipped to handle these peer pressures?
So you have some programs set up where the parents, interested parents watching, maybe they can become your ambassadors, or do you have funding that you can do it on a wider scale?
Well, we're still very at early ages. We're doing the research, we're looking at what we can do. We have programs available, but I do also realize there's a lot of organizations that are also providing that resource, have that capacity and have those training programs. I always say that one of the biggest resources that we have in Fiji is the church. And the church should be at the forefront of this work with parents. And I say that because I also serve as a pastor. So I'm challenging churches, what are we doing? How is our Sunday or Sabbath messages equipping our parents? Highlighting the importance of parenting and bringing these spiritual truths that will help raise up the family and protect the home. And so the churches are very much a big part of the solution, and as well as other organizations, if we can see that as part of the solution. So yes, there definitely needs to be more work on that.
If I can add to that, Caritas Fiji has got a parenting program. Archbishop from the Catholic Church has been advocating. They've developed a positive parenting program, and they are trying it. At PCC, at the pastoral care, there's training available on trauma work. Because one of the biggest things is, it's beyond thinking that an adult can inject drugs in a child. I mean, there's something very wrong and twisted in the adult's head. But also, we are seeing that. We are told that pornography is exposed to children by adults around grog bowls. And if adults can do that to the children, what it shows to me is that these are traumatized. We are a pretty twisted society. So there needs to be different levels of trauma healing. And that's something we've been talking a lot about internally within the government with some of our ministers, but also with the churches. And Archbishop and PCC have come forward, and they will be some things that they will be rolling out and will be supporting in terms of positive parenting and providing the support. Yes, if the parents are going through pressure, where do they go? What are the services they could utilize?
Yeah.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
I've always resorted to drugs because of the work that I do as a coping mechanism.
You said you started sex work and drugs at the same time?
I was 12 years old.
Do you believe, based on the current situation, your salary and allowances should be reviewed and reduced?
Definitely, I think it should be reviewed to reflect what is there in the market.
Is the government of the day promoting nepotism within our community and hatred towards Indo-Fijians?
Thank you very much. The answer is no.
$1 in $3 of our taxes goes towards servicing our debt. So you can't say it's nothing.
There's also the need to do financial inclusion a bit better.
What is your message to the people who may rate you as not good enough for finals rugby?
Success doesn't just happen overnight.
Fiji Village Straight Talk with Vijay Narayan. Watch it on the Fiji Village Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, Ben Morrison, who is the co-founder and program director for Inspire Pacific and Assistant Minister for Women, Children and Social Protection, Sashi, Kiran. We're talking about the ills of our society, but not just that, how we can fix it. And the questions that have been sent, a lot of interesting questions on how things can be fixed, how things can improve, where people can assist, a collective effort needed, very important message about parenting, a real good parenting skills needed. One of the questions that have come in, Assistant Minister, is can we introduce fully functional vocational training centers such as agriculture, farm management, etc., which can enable these kids to be part of some constructive activities so they are actively involved in the community? And also, are there plans to have youth centers around the country with activities that have meaningful engagement for youths?
Absolutely. I think, I hope one day, one of these days, you'll invite Minister for Youth and he'll talk about his great plans. But there is active, like TVET is being activated, Polytech is being activated. We have Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Fisheries training programs, and Ministry of Youth has 5 training programs. So all of this are basically what the question is asking. Yes, we have all these programs and we are absorbing youths there. Most of the schools will have vocational again, and we are hoping with the review of curriculum we'll have agriculture and things in all schools like we used to have.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Mr. Morrison, just in relation to vocational centers and youth centers, you're doing some work with the juveniles. Do you think it will be ideal to roll out targeted programs that would assist the young people in the country?
Yes, absolutely. One of the big issues with young people that gets them going on the wrong path is idleness, and you could say the lack of purpose. Especially with young men, we realize that with men, there's this intrinsic, inbuilt desire in them to be able to be something, accomplish something. And when young men and when boys aren't sort of guided along that pathway, their sense of worth or value is depleted. So I believe that the opportunities to receive training, to be equipped, is very important. However, in saying that, what I believe our education system needs to do is to begin to shift into more an individualized and tailored education system that specifically is designed to enhance the unique passions and interests of our young people, as opposed to sort of a blanket educational approach where you have 2 young boys that will thrive and 5 fall through the crack because they've lost interest. So one of our approaches as an organization is individualized educational approach, which really is at the forefront of the spear, you could say, in terms of bringing transformation and education, not just formal education, but even informal education. And then even understanding our different learning needs. We've noticed that we're having these young boys and we're recognizing learning disabilities that are contributing factors to them dropping out of schools, but perhaps they're not being picked up, they're not correctly diagnosed. So being able to really assess our young people and these boys is important for us to guide them to the right training program, and I think we need more programs that have the capacity to do that. And Minister mentioned something in terms of time. It requires a lot of time to create programs that can be tailored and individualized, but I believe that's the investment we need to make if we are to truly awaken dreams. Not all our young people are mathematicians or doctors, some, and so I'm happy that there are these different vocational institutions.
I see you've got a program Tangane Mai, if you can talk about that.
Sure. So our Tangane Mai program, it's really a support program that is focused around identity formation. And we believe that at the heart of the development that needs to happen in our young people is a sense of identity. Who am I? It's the question that most young people, especially in the adolescent ages, are trying to answer. So Tangane Mai program helps them to realize, different aspects of their capabilities in terms of their creative capability, their critical thinking capabilities, the capacity to be bold and strong and focused, even the capacity to leadership capabilities. For a young person to know that, hey, I can be a leader, I can make a difference, and have that sense of identity is very important. So how do we guide them to begin to look at themselves in that way? This is really the heart of Tangane Mai program.
Now, questions coming in. This question is, what are your thoughts, Assistant Minister and Mr. Morrison, question for both of you, regarding the kids of school age who are not in school and seem to be neglected by their own family and even the public. The government is paying for the school fees. What can or should the government do to them or their families regarding this?
So we are trying to find through the villages now the school dropouts and those who are on streets, very young ones, trying to find the consent of these adults to put them in boarding or put them through vocational. And these are not only children, even the adults with the people who've had brush off with the law. How can we put them in some of the vocational, which is very prepared, like Tutu or Montfort? So they are very much on our radar, and we're trying to make sure that they get absorbed. I would beg patience because there's a lot of work happening and it won't be visible immediately. But we are paying attention, and we would like the whole of society approach. Like even the skill building, each of the cultural groups, each of the religious groups, each of the community, village groups. Like with housing, we are seeing library projects in housing halls and things. So all of us will have to take some responsibility.
Basically,
the government is looking at.
Basically, you're saying you're stepping in if the parent is not carrying out his or her role.
Yes.
You're saying sign it over, some guardianship. How
it's
does
not
it
parents. Work? Mostly, most of the children, that we are seeing dropped off and all are with guardians, mostly.
So you will ask guardians.
So the guardians, at least at the street kids, that if guardians can consent for these kids to go to boarding or go into rehab, so that they go back to numeracy and literacy skills. But as much as possible through Toke Affairs, now we are going into villages and hoping that these children can be put in schools and right kind of emotional support is provided for.
Mr. Morris?
Yes, with the issue with school dropouts, again, as I mentioned before, we need to ask ourselves why they're dropping out. What's the reason they haven't why have they lost interest in school? Is it a learning disability? Is it the pace of content delivery? And I think there's a lot of questions around how we can help strengthen our education system, which I'm sure the minister is working on that, in order to be a part of the solution. So I think the conversations, there's quite a lot of different factors that need to all work together in order for there to be a solution. So I think this question is really focused around the education system and how we can perhaps adjust our education system to not just meet the need of the child, but I think how do we harness the gifts of our children that will lead down a path of economic empowerment down the line? Is there an industry for this new passion or gift? How do you develop that industry? So there's a connection between education and economic development. So,
and wherever Thronicoros and churches and all are identifying those unemployed youths, those dropouts, now we have systems like through the different ministries to place them into vocational and upskilling.
Yeah.
So there's a very much focus, and we are becoming very aware of the problem because of the different consultations that are happening.
This is a question that was sent in. What are your thoughts on the ministry including one of the compulsory major requirements for every application for the ministry that every social welfare recipient should attend every knowledge broadening workshop to help change people's mindsets? The person says he is asking this question as he's a Turangani Koro of Wailotua and Wanimbukatai Levu, and he's speaking from experience. As he says, lack of knowledge is causing havoc in most communities in Fiji. He says he is talking about the abuse of assistance provided. For example, assistance provided is not being used for the children but for other unworthy occasions.
There is a definite, so I think when we came in, you would have heard us say that we don't seem to have a data, we don't seem to have an understanding of what we have. And we right now are putting a database and finalizing it with the intention. Most people on our welfare assistance need to go through life skills programs to have improved livelihood. So that's very much part of our plan. And in some of the communities where like Heart Home, where a majority of our beneficiaries are, we talking to them about childcare, so then the young mothers can be put through some of this training and education and upskilling through APTC and livelihoods. So that's very much part of our plan going forward, and we're hoping to engage many of the other partners in upskilling these beneficiaries.
Inspire Pacific's thoughts on that?
Yes, I believe that the solution really requires a collaborative effort from the community. Because what the gentleman is talking about and what I truly believe in is the change that needs to happen is a paradigm shift. There needs to be a change in mindset as opposed to just trying to change behavior. And so the question is who have the capacity to be a part of this change in mindset. You know, you have schools, you have churches, you have different youth groups, organizations that all can come on board to help create a culture of transformation where our mindset is moving from one level to the next. And I think that connects to the other thing that is evident is we have a very, we could say, depleting moral compass as far as on a national level. So the question of morality, nationally speaking, who's involved, who are the stakeholders, who should be taking responsibility? Yes, it's parents, but the parents are part of churches, we're part of different organizations that feel like we all need to work together to help set things straight in terms of this is right, this is wrong, this is what you teach your children, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and again it will require a collaborative effort, which I think is a time and opportunity to do that.
And we need to move quickly because we're seeing what is happening on the streets.
Absolutely.
Now, Assistant Minister, what are your comments on challenges where children are left on their own, parents even going overseas, leaving their children with relatives? We had revelations on our show last week, children even walking around with $1,000 to $1,500 and eventually getting into drugs. What are your thoughts? What are you picking up on, knowing that a lot of parents are going overseas to work and maybe to keep their children happy, sending back a lot of money to them?
I would say unacceptable. As soon as we see broken families, the impact it has on children is lifetime. So, like you said, we're rethinking the moral compass, rethinking what are we going overseas to do. A lot of people, I know some of my close friends have moved overseas for growth, but have lost their children to drugs, even in some of the other countries. So I think when we have children, there has to be a priority given. Unless we have reliable people looking after our children, just chasing money will not do it. So I don't think it's acceptable that both parents move and leave the children with somebody else. You're losing your children in the end. And we as a whole society need to rethink, what are we chasing?
You're picking this up from the young people you're working with and what's coming through?
Well, we're actually seeing now, we're seeing issues not just here, but issues coming now from abroad. We're having issues now of these individuals who are going across because they haven't been prepared to go there. They're ending up in very abusive cycles of alcohol and drugs, and there's quite some complaints, and I think the NEC would be aware of this. But as we're looking at it, it may be sort of a blunt description, but it seems to be a form of modern slavery, because we are intentionally, and there's some level of responsibility on us in terms of just somewhat promoting and encouraging this large movements of individuals. And I think there was, and it could be corrected, but it seemed like there was an upward of about 10,000 individuals moving in 1 year across. When is it going to stop? I don't know. The need for workers is growing in Australia and New Zealand. So where is the stop? Who determines when to stop? And I think it goes back to the whole moral compass. But there really needs to be a shift in mindset for the solution to this problem. And again, like I said, there's a trickle-down effect. We are looking at now the effects on the ground, which is sort of at the fruit level. But what is the root problems that's causing these migrations and movements? Is it a mindset shift that needs to take place, and how do we help?
People are saying there's opportunities elsewhere. I mean, people are looking at opportunities elsewhere. There was a provincial council meeting, Assistant Minister Naita Siri, provincial council meeting, and it came up there. Even the person asking that please don't let the people go and let them utilize their land here. So a bigger discussion needed. Is there some plans to ensure people utilize land here, try to earn more money instead of going overseas?
There are a lot of opportunities right here. But one thing that, like you're saying, shifter, one thing that we hear our children being told from childhood is, grow up, educate, go overseas. It's like a total brainwash that life is the only life that's better. And some of it may be better. But it's not, we're not encouraged to think for ourselves. If you have an opportunity to go and stay, you'll always be encouraged to go, unless people are really well settled and would choose to be here. I would go back to our social fabric and what do we value? Who do we value? Some of us value our country and our family enough to want to stick it. Some of us value, status or opportunities, and a lot of it has to come back to we as a society rethinking. I'll give you an example. One of the community, our Gujarati community, said, one of the, in our families is so much wedding and jewelry giving and all that. And they said, as part of judgment, people are always judging, what did the family give. So as a society, they decided that there will be no giving. And it was a whole society approach. And that's how it's going now. The bride will be wearing fake jewelry, for example. And there's some villagers who have made this decision, I know, okay, no kalavata, no function. Like when Lutu was doing it, all funerals and functions was only happening on a particular day. So I think as a society, we need to sort of rethink and decide what do we value and how we're going to manage some of these pressures. Because we are at the moment letting ourselves drift with whatever is hitting us, whether it's drugs, whether it's society pressure, whether we have to look a particular way, we have to be a particular way. So there is a lot of opportunities available, but the grounding is important. If we are well grounded, it doesn't really matter what the influences are.
My final question is about parental neglect. A lot of that has come through. Negligence is an offense, and also people are starting to say, why can't we take tougher action in this regard? There's been a lot of advising going on, and that there needs to be some steps taken, and because the effects are clearly seen on the ground. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think to every problem there's always a reactive solution, which is somewhat trying to catch people. And then there's a proactive solution, which is keeping people from entering or stepping into that wrong or negative mindset. So perhaps having legislation around that for parents who do neglect may be a helpful thing. And actually we are seeing that it may be what's needed right now, given the current circumstance, to somewhat curb the level of neglect that is taking place. However, having said that, it's always a short-term solution, and the long-term solution is the changing of mindset of parents. How are we helping parents understand the value of spending time with their children and the effects of neglect on their children? And I don't think most families actually think far ahead enough to understand how they're contributing to pro-criminal behavior and violence, perhaps, simply by not spending time with their children. It seems like it's such a small issue, but actually it is a huge issue when we think about parenting. Even just a few minutes away from children on a phone can have some effects on children. So I think there's a lot of training that needs to take place around that, and then not just training how to be parents, but dealing with what are the basic human needs that we have in development. It's also a personal development issue. In terms of all children, they need support, and they need a sense of security and safety in order to fully develop, not just emotionally, but even biologically. That needs to happen. And we have so much capacity and potential in our children, but if parents don't do their part to help in that development and provide that support, that nurturing environment, obviously children will always bear the brunt of that consequence. So yes, now parents need to face some consequences, but then in the long term, I believe that training...
Go with enforcement, yes, and ensure that you
Mm.
have this approach taken, Assistant Minister,
Both.
because we've been talking for quite some time.
Both. We are going to, there's a lot of talk within that, yes, we need to become stronger with the neglect of children. We have a children's department as policy. So we are looking at it. But, like you said, I have had a parent calling that the 14-year-old girl goes off and then police and everybody has to go and look for her. We've had this continuous complaints of parents losing their children to sexual abuse or relationships around their own families that they overlooked for over some time, and all of a sudden it's hit them. So parents themselves are crying out, and how do you punish them for neglect?
Right.
But we are going to come stronger on parental neglect, but there needs to be, like you said, much more support and rethinking about what does parenting look like, and putting a bit of focus on that going forward. And we hope that media will help us do that. Because
We
it's
definitely
crucial.
will, and that's the show for tonight on Fiji Village Straight Talk. We will have these guests back in the next few months again to continue to check, because as you can see, the country is at a place where more action is required. Time is the key here to ensure that we do not continue to lose our children to some of these things where many more, maybe every day, coming out and getting exposed and getting caught up and not knowing what to do next. Until next week, have a great evening.